Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're here today because, honestly, we have an absolute powerhouse of a historical mystery to unpack. We're diving headfirst into the ancient, highly cryptic warnings of the Book of Revelation, specifically Chapter 3. Now, I know it's incredibly easy to read these ancient texts and just feel completely disconnected, right? Like, what does this have to do with us? Well, today, we are going to decode these vivid, apocalyptic telegrams that were sent to three very specific cities. By looking at the actual real-world geography and these brilliant local metaphors, we're going to uncover some absolutely stunning insights. And trust me, they are just as relevant today as they were in the first century. So let's jump right in. I want you to stop and ask yourself a quick question. What do ancient zombie churches, nauseating tap water, and, well, your smartphone habits have in common? I know, it sounds like a ridiculous punchline waiting to happen. But I promise you, by the end of this explainer, you're going to see exactly how these wildly different things lock together like a giant puzzle. We're going to use the physical geography of three ancient cities to decode some of the most famous and, frankly, most biting metaphors in all of history. Section 1. The Danger of Comfort. To really get our heads around this first historical case study, we have to set the scene. By the time this message actually arrives to the Christians in Asia Minor, their biggest threat isn't what you'd think. It wasn't some external terror like marching Roman armies, and it wasn't intense local pagan pressure. No, the absolute greatest danger facing these communities was something much closer to home. It was their own wealth and security. And that leads us to a pretty sobering reality. Comfort without conviction is usually the very first stage of spiritual cardiac arrest. See, these cities were perfectly situated right along major Roman trade highways. We're talking swimming in wealth, massive imperial influence, and total material security. They were comfortable, really comfortable. But in the vocabulary of early Christian revelation, all that comfort just led to spiritual amnesia. They were quietly self-satisfied, basically playing dress-up without any real spiritual life underneath it all. So to wake them up, a series of dramatic, temple-saturated warnings had to be delivered to just slice right through that first-century vanity. Section 2. Sardis, the Zombie Church. The historical irony of this particular city is just off the charts. And spoiler alert, they're about to get a devastating reality check. What is so fascinating here is the actual layout of the city itself. Picture this. Ancient Sardis is perched way up on a steep, rocky plateau. All across the Mediterranean, it was famous for being an impregnable military fortress. Like, nobody is getting in. But, and this is a huge but, twice in its history, enemy armies actually captured the city. And they didn't even use massive siege engines or overwhelming force. No, they captured it because the local guards were so ridiculously overconfident in their natural cliff defenses that they literally fell asleep on watch. They dozed off, and stealthy scouts just scaled the cliffs completely undetected in the dark. Okay, so keep that deeply embarrassing military history in the back of your mind. Now imagine you live in Sardis and you hear the resurrected Lord deliver this exact message. I know thy works, that thou hast a name that thou livest and art dead. Be watchful. Ouch, right? Every single reader in that town immediately felt the burn of that statement. Christ was taking their own humiliating history and using it as a direct, pointed metaphor for their spiritual state. Sardis had a fantastic brand name. They had great PR, a reputation for being super active, but spiritually, they were a walking zombie ward, a totally flatlined spiritual pulse, just living entirely off past achievements. Yet even in sleepy Sardis, there was this tiny remnant that held on. The text specifically notes a few who had not defiled their garments. Now, in the ancient world, clothing was everything. It was your identity. To defile your garments meant you were smearing them with the dirt of worldly compromise, basically playing along with the local pagan trade cults just to make sure your business stayed profitable. In stark contrast, the faithful are promised white garments. If you look at ancient texts like the first-century Christian hymns called the Odes of Solomon, they describe the redeemed soul actually taking off filthy rags to be dressed in a shining garment of light as they enter the heavenly Holy of Holies. So this wasn't just a nice costume. It was a total investiture of divine purity. And you earned it by refusing to let the mud of Babylonian business stick to your soul. Section 3. Philadelphia, the Unshakable Pillar. We're shifting gears now, moving away from that zombified church to a tiny, battered, but incredibly faithful outpost that literally refused to quit. The crucial thing to understand about Philadelphia is what it was like to live there every single day. This city was situated in a region that got hit by terrifying, destructive earthquakes constantly. Imagine the sheer trauma of that. Residents lived in constant dread of sudden tremors that could just bring a heavy stone roof crashing down on their heads without any warning. People frequently had to grab whatever they could, flee their homes, and live in temporary tents outside the city walls. So, to this exhausted, traumatized little band of believers, Christ gives a profoundly beautiful promise. Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. Think about it. In a world where absolutely every physical structure cracks and falls apart, the promise of becoming an eternal, unshakable temple pillar, one that never ever has to run outside in fear again, was immense. A pillar doesn't run from the storm, right? It just holds the weak forever. And check out the incredible detail added to this promise, a triple inscription. They would have the name of God, the name of the New Jerusalem, and his new name written right upon them. In ancient Near Eastern temple practices, a master builder or a king would actually carve his royal signature directly onto the major foundation pillars. Why? To mark his absolute ownership and consecration of the building. And this is also profound temple language and Latter-day Saint theology. Receiving a sacred name written upon your person, that means being claimed, being sealed, and being permanently integrated into the very architecture of God's royal family. Section 4, Laodicea, the lukewarm sludge. All right, let's head to our final destination. This is easily the most famous and, without a doubt, the most aggressively roasted church in the entire New Testament. Laodicea was the incredibly wealthy financial capital of the region. The geographic comparison here is just brilliant. Laodicea was fabulously wealthy. They had booming textile industries, cutting-edge medicine, the whole shebang. But they lacked one vital, basic thing: good drinking water. Neighboring Hierapolis, they had hot mineral springs that were super therapeutic and healing. Neighboring Colossae had crisp, ice-cold mountain streams that were pure and refreshing. But Laodicea, they had to pipe their water in via a massive stone aqueduct. So by the time the hot water from Hierapolis traveled 6 miles over to Laodicea, it was warm, stagnant, full of gross minerals, and totally nauseating to drink. And by the time Colossae's cold water arrived, yep, it was just flat and lukewarm. Which leads us right to this absolutely legendary punchline from Christ. So then, because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. I mean, cold water refreshes you, hot water heals you. But lukewarm, mineral-heavy aqueduct sludge, it literally just makes you want to gag. Christ uses their own terrible civic infrastructure to deliver this devastating metaphor. They weren't actively fighting God, which would be cold. They weren't actively serving him, which would be hot. They were just comfortable, self-satisfied, and totally bland. And the biting irony just keeps coming. Christ pulls back the curtain on their self-delusion in this rapid-fire breakdown. To a city famous for being a banking capital, he tells them, actually, you're spiritually bankrupt. To a city globally famous for luxurious black wool textiles, he tells them they are spiritually naked. To a city housing a world-renowned medical school famous for its eye salve, he tells them they are stone blind. He's telling them to stop buying the cheap, temporary luxuries of Babylon and instead buy authentic faith tested in fire, real temple purity, and divine eye salve so they can finally see reality for what it is. Section 5, the promise of exaltation. Now, despite this intense historical roast, the letter to Laodicea pivots to something truly awe-inspiring. It moves straight from harsh reality to the ultimate cosmic reward. And honestly, it is arguably the most breathtaking theological promise in all of Scripture. Here is the promise. To him that overcometh will I grant to sit with me in my throne. Just pause and think about that for a second. God isn't offering a cheap folding chair in the back of heaven. He is actively inviting human beings to sit down directly on his throne alongside him. In Eastern Orthodox Christianity, this ultimate promise of divine progression is known as theosis, deification, or the incredible process of human beings becoming actual partakers of the divine nature. And this brilliant concept finds an incredibly explicit expression in Latter-day Saint doctrine too. In his famous 1844 King Follett Discourse, the prophet Joseph Smith reached right into this exact concept to explain human destiny. He said we learn to be kings and priests to God by going from one small degree to another, from grace to grace, from exaltation to exaltation, to sit in glory as do those who sit enthroned in everlasting power. This isn't some metaphor for passive rest, folks. It's a literal invitation to active cosmic partnership. We were designed to overcome, to be clothed in light, and to reign in celestial glory. Section 6, Your Spiritual Temperature Check. As we wrap things up today, I really want to bring this right back to you and me. Because let's face it is absurdly easy to sit back and laugh at the ancient Laodiceans or roll our eyes at those lazy guards in Sardis. But their exact temptations, they are staring us right in the face every single time we pick up our smartphones or mindlessly map out our daily priorities. So, what are the modern takeaways here? I've got 3 for you. First, check your spiritual temperature. Are you living your faith with genuine enthusiasm? Or have you kind of slipped into that lukewarm, Laodicean autopilot where you're just checking boxes and trying to avoid trouble? Second, stop living on past reputation like Sardis. Real faith requires daily upkeep. You absolutely cannot live off last year's spiritual experiences or your parents' testimony. And third, stand firm like a pillar in Philadelphia. When modern culture shakes around you, when trends mock truth and social pressure demands that you fold, hold your ground. Keep your covenants clean. Which leaves us with this final, lingering question. Will you settle for the stagnant, lukewarm comfort of the world, or will you claim your place as an unshakable pillar in the temple of God? The message of Revelation 3 is a massive wake-up call to all of us. Stop settling for the sludge. Knock on the door, let the Savior in, and put on that white garment. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, keep growing, and I'll catch you next time.